The ARP protocol, or the Address Resolution Protocol, is what we use to translate our IP addresses into MAC addresses. ARP, just like much other on IPv4, is a trusting protocol. Anyone can respond to the ARP request. If you look at the graph on the right, you can see a system sends a request out. Does anyone know the physical address for this IP address? It's sent as a multicast to everybody on the network. And then either a switch or the actual physical device would reply back in a unicast saying, yes, here's the MAC address of that device. But anyone can reply back to that, which is what an ARP poisoning attack is, or a cache poisoning attack. An attacker sends fake ARP responses back, and it often does that with critical ARP entries. That could be our default gateway, and it can also keep doing it on a recurring basis. Hey, by the way, this is the default gateway. Send all your traffic to this MAC address, which would then probably be the attacker and not our default gateway. We can, as a countermeasure, hardcode our ARP entries for the really critical devices that we're connected to, like our default gateway. And we also use reverse ARP on our diskless workstations to get them IP addresses. And it does exactly work in reverse. It sends out, hey, this is my MAC address. And then they get the reply, well, if that's your MAC address, this is your IP address. We use ICMP for many troubleshooting steps in our daily lives if we work as network administrators. It's used both to help with IP addressing, but also used for pings and TTL exceeds and trace routes. Most people with a networking background would have used it extensively for troubleshooting. We can send an ICMP request or a ping to see if a certain host is up. If it is, and they don't have ICMP blocked, it will reply back. You can see the top image over here on the right. In my command prompt, I've typed in ping iscsquared.org. It then translates that into an IP address, and since they don't have ICMP blocked, it replies back from the address, the size of the ping, how long it took for the ping to get from us to them and then back, and then the time to live. If you just do the normal ping on a Windows workstation, it'll do 4 pings at a time. If we do get the reply back, we know the site or the server is up, and we can move on to other troubleshooting steps. If we don't get a reply, that doesn't always mean it's down. It might just be IC² blocking ICMP traffic. We send the traffic to the server. Even if it gets to the server, it might drop the reply package. So it's just one of the things we'd use for troubleshooting, but we can't rely on it being down just because we don't get a reply. It's very common for firewalls or routers to block ICMP replies. And on the bottom right here, we see a ping towards an IPv6 address. It looks very much the same. Obviously it uses the IPv6 header, but it still uses 32 bytes of data, and we get the response time in milliseconds. So both of these are 56 milliseconds. That's just above a 20th of a second. Traceroutes take it just a step further. They still use ICMP packets, but it uses the TTL or the time to live values somewhat in reverse. The first packet is sent with a time to live of 1. Once it hits the first router, the time to live is decremented, and the first router sends an ICMP time exceed message back to us. We have now identified our first hop. We know the IP address. Then we set another ICMP package, number 2, with the time to live 2. The first router decrements the time to live to 1 and sends it to the next hop. Router 2 then does the same. Time to live, 0. It sends back the time exceeded message. We now know router number 2. And it does that for every single hop until it reaches the destination IP or it exceeds 30 hops. If you look at the output over here on the right, I did a trace route again to the IC² website. In the Windows command prompt, the command is just tracert and then the IP or the address. The first hop is my local address. The second one is my WAN IP, my public IP. Then you can see a couple of hops in Hawaii. Then we jump to South California, LA, Santa Clara, San Jose. And then finally we hit something, probably an IC² firewall. And then at the end, the last hop is the actual server. If IC² have turned off the ICMP reply, on the last hop we would just get nothing. But we would also be able to tell that all the traffic gets all the way until the last hop. Traceroute uses ICMP. Remember how it works. It sends a packet with a time to live of 1. We get a reply. Then we send one with 2. We get a reply. We send one with 3, and so on, all the way up to the destination host, or if we exceed 30 hops. Years back, it was very common to use Telnet for remote access over networks. Remember, TCP port 23, but everything, and I mean everything, is sent in plain text. That includes the data, but also our usernames and passwords. We should never use Telnet. Anyone who can gain access to our network can easily sniff both the data and our credentials, and even take control of our Telnet sessions. Instead, we use SSH, or Secure Shell. SSH was designed to replace and add security elements to unsecure protocols like Telnet, FTP, or HTTP. SSH version 1 had a bunch of vulnerabilities, so we moved to version 2, which was until recently considered secure. It provides a secure, and I'm using in quotes here, connection over an unsecured network, in most cases the internet. We learned from the Snowden leaks in 2013, at that time, the NSA can sometimes decrypt SSH traffic and get access to their data. And then again in 2017, WikiLeaks confirmed that the CIA, and this is the only time I think I'm going to refer to the CIA, and it not being the CIA triad, this is the United States Central Intelligence Agency. They had developed some tools that could crack the SSH protocol. They had developed a tool called Bothenspy, which is an implant that targets the SSH client program Xshell on the Microsoft Windows platform and basically allows them to decrypt the encrypted information. And they developed another tool called Gyrfalcon, also worked as an implant that targeted OpenSSH clients on the Linux platform, CentOS, Debian, Perl, SUSE, or Ubuntu. So while a regular hacker might not have access to these tools, understand that SSH at the moment is no longer secure. And really that is what happens with a lot of encryption. We implement stronger encryption, someone breaks it, we build stronger stuff, someone breaks it, it's an ongoing arms race. And as we covered earlier, attackers are not just hackers, it's nation states. Hacking and compromising data security is a 9-to-5 job. And obviously a lot of focus is on the big players, United States, Russia, China, Israel, North Korea. But pretty much every nation state on the planet is working on ways they can use the internet and how connected we are as a weapon. Let's move back into something less scary and a little bit drier. The FTP protocol is used to transfer files to and from servers. There is no confidentiality and there's no integrity checks. And just like Telnet, this is not something which you use. Everything is also in plain text here. Since the vast majority of the data we transport is transported over unsecure networks, or networks at least where we want to have that added layer of security, we want to use other protocols. FTP uses TCP port 20 and 21, 20 for the actual data, and 21 for the control collection. This is where the actual commands are sent. While we don't want to use regular FTP, the ports are still the same used for other FTP types. We can either use SFTP, which uses SSH, and it's just translated to Secure Files Transfer Protocol. It just adds an SSH layer to the FTP session, which now is not so secure. Or we can use FTPS, which is just FTP and then secure. Here we use TLS or SSL as added security to our basic FTP session. We also use one more version of FTP, TFTP, Trivial File Transfer Protocol. TFTP runs on UDP port 69, and there is no authentication or directory structure. All files are written and read from one directory, which is normally the TFTP boot directory. TFTP is used for bootstrapping, which is where we download the operating system over a network for diskless workstations. Remember, those are the ones we also use the reverse ARP for to get an IP address. And we'll also use TFTP for saving router configurations. We talked about how emails use port 25, 110, and 143. Let's look a little bit of the traffic flow of when we actually send an email, how it happens, and the servers we use. If you look at the graph over here on the right, I'm sending an email to Jane. From my mail use agent, that could be Outlook or whatever else you use, I format and send the message using SMTP to my mail submission agent. That's our email server. That server then determines the destination address, in this case Jane, at b.org. The MSA then resolves the fully qualified domain name of the mail server in their DNS. We then send a DNS request to the name server for that domain, in this case b.org. The b.org name server replies back with the mail exchange records for their domain, in this case it's mx.b.org, with the name fully resolved, then sends the SNMP message to Jane's company's mail server. If it's a small organization, it's likely they only have one or two, but in large organizations they might have many mail servers. If they do, the message is forwarded to the mail server that Jane's attached to. The MDA, or mail delivery agent, sends the email to Jane's account, and her mail use agent or email program picks up the message using either POP3 or IMAP. Jane can now read my email. For the exam, I would at least know the traffic flow. We send the email to our email server. Our email server sends a request to their DNS server asking for the address of their mail server. It replies back. We send the message to the mail server, and the mail server forwards it to the recipient. We looked really briefly at DNS or domain name system earlier, and the request just now we sent from the email server was a DNS request. All DNS really does is it translates server names into real IP addresses. Remember the Google one from earlier? We don't type the IP address into our browser, we just type google.com, and DNS then resolves it into the actual address. And remember, DNS uses TCP and UDP port 53, and it uses the get host by name or get host by address when you send the request. That request can be handled by multiple different servers. The authoritative name server is the authority for a given namespace. In the case of the email, it will probably be the name server for b.org. And depending on our configuration, our mail server might keep that in cache for a while. So the next time I send an email to Jane, if the cache is long enough, or if someone else has sent emails to the same company, it can completely skip the name server and just send it directly to the email server. A recursive name server is a server that tries to resolve all the names it doesn't know already. That way, once it has the names, it doesn't have to do the extra step where it looks up the name server for the domain it's sending the email to. DNS is also natively a trusting protocol. It uses UDP for most requests and it has no authentication natively. It can technically be added, but most people don't. Which is why attackers can use DNS poisoning. It pretty much works the same way that ARP poisoning did. The attacker sends a fake name and a fake IP address combo to another DNS server, and the server then keeps that in the DNS records until it expires. We can choose to use DNSSEC instead, which is just DNS security extension. It can provide us authentication and integrity using PKI encryption, but it does not provide confidentiality. Think of it as a digital signature for our DNS services. SNMP we use a lot of times to monitor our network. Don't confuse it with SMTP, which is the mail delivery protocol. We use it to monitor devices on our network, routers, switches, servers, even HVAC units or UPSs. In most cases, anything really we can assign an IP address to, we can monitor to some extent. And for it to work, we have to have SNMP client installed and enabled on the client. And depending on which version of SNMP we use, we can either report just up and down, but if version 2 or 3, we can get much more granularity. We can see the traffic utilization, the internal temperature of our system, the memory use, how much hard disk space is used, at what percentage the HVAC system is running, how much battery power is left on our UPS, and so on. On SNMP version 1 and 2, data is sent in clear text. Bad idea. So really SNMP 1 we completely avoid. It's not really used anywhere. SNMP 2 is still widely used, but if we can in any way, we should avoid it. And remember, clear text. Anyone sniffing our network can get access to our data. Whereas SNMP 1 really only just shows up and down, we can actually manage systems over SNMP 2. So if an attacker gets access to our credentials, they can shut systems down, they can reconfigure them, can shut interfaces down, which is why SNMP 2 is more dangerous than 1, because it's clear text. So what we want to use is SNMP version 3, because it encrypts everything, giving us the confidentiality, integrity, and availability we would want. This should be the standard for what we use across any organization. We've talked about both HTTP and HTTPS earlier. The protocols that transport our HTML data, they are not HTML. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and remember it uses port 80, 8008 or 8080. All website traffic is sent unencrypted over the internet. It's still common to see a lot of pages use HTTP. There's a move towards HTTPS instead, just to add that layer of security. And HTTPS just stands for HTTP Secure. It uses port 443, or it can alternatively be programmed to use port 8443. It encrypts all the data we send over the internet. And the data it sends is HTML. Where HTTP is the transfer protocol, HTML is Hypertext Markup Language. That's the actual language the websites are written in. Don't confuse the two. Over here on the right, first you can see an HTTPS connection. It has the little padlock and the secure, meaning the website is using port 443 most likely. The next one is not using HTTPS, it's just a HTTP connection, and if you click on that little icon, the little information icon, you can see this is not a secure site. Don't enter anything here that's private or personal, or you don't want compromised. So if on any website you're doing any payments, you're using credit cards, you're entering personal information, even if you know the website and you trust them, never do that if it's not an HTTPS connection. And then finally we have the HTML, the language that websites are actually written in. There's a small snippet here of a website and how that actually looks. BootP, or Bootstrap Protocol, is the protocol we use on our diskless workstations to determine the OS we need to download. That was the one we downloaded with TFTP and the IP address we need. Most system BIOSes support BootP, which means we can download an operating system without having a disk. And then finally we have DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. This is how we assign our IP addresses. In most environments, we would have a DHCP server that either statically or dynamically would assign IP addresses to our clients. In your house, it's most likely going to be dynamically assigned. You plug in a network cable, you're online. Or you connect to the wireless and you're online. You have no clue and you don't care about the IP address assigned to you. In our organization, however, it's very common to have static IP addresses assigned to certain devices. We want this server to have that IP address always. Then on the server, we would configure the IP address, and on the DHCP server, we would exclude that IP address from our DHCP pool. The DHCP pool are all the addresses we have to assign to anyone who asks for a dynamic address. Anyone who says, hey, I need an IP address, I don't care what it is. We then assign them a dynamic IP. Both BootP and DHCP uses UDP port 67 for the server and UDP port 68 for the client. And also for the exam, I would know how a DHCP discovery would work. If you look at the graph over here on the right, the client sends a discovery saying, hey, I would like an IP address. The server then sends an offer, hey, here's your new IP address. The client replies back, thank you, I will take it. And the server acknowledges that IP address is now assigned to you. Again, oversimplified, but this is what you need to know. Most servers are set up where you get a certain amount of time for the lease of the IP. Let's say our organization, you get an IP address for 4 days. At the half of that duration, client sends a request saying, hey, can I have it again? The server then says, yes, it's your IP address again. It renews the 4-day lease. And then again, after 2 days, your client says, hey, can I keep this address? Server says, yes. That way we keep the same address over and over unless we let the lease expire or we do something else where we release the IP on the server.